My family decided something I worked years for was no longer just mine. The first thing I felt was heat in my face. Not from the sun but from shame. The kind that crawls up your neck when someone says something about you that you never agreed was true. I was standing on the front steps of my own house when my sister said it, her voice calm and practical, like she was discussing grocery lists instead of my life. "You don't really need all this space, do you, Clara? You don't even have kids." I remember gripping the mailbox because my hands were shaking, and I didn't want her to see that. The metal cold under my fingers. Behind me, the house still smelled like fresh paint and new wood, the smell I had waited years to breathe. I had imagined this moment so many times, unlocking the door, standing there alone, knowing every square foot was mine. I had never imagined my family would be standing there too, measuring me with their eyes like an empty room. The house was in a quiet neighborhood outside Madison, wide streets, old trees, the kind of place people described as perfect for raising families. I bought it because it was the first place I could afford that didn't feel temporary. I was tired of leases and landlords and moving boxes, tired of building a life that could be dismantled in 30 days' notice. I worked 2 jobs for years, skipped vacations, wore the same coats until the lining tore, said no to dinners and weekends away. Every extra dollar went into a savings account I never touched, the one my mother liked to call my obsession. When I finally closed on the house, I didn't tell anyone right away. I walked through it alone, barefoot on the hardwood floors, listening to the echo of my steps, touching the walls like they might disappear if I didn't. I cried in the empty living room while late afternoon light filled the space. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that my life wasn't some unfinished draft waiting for children to give it meaning. I should have known it wouldn't stay mine in my family's eyes for long. In my family, nothing belonged to one person for very long, especially not if someone else needed it more. And need was always defined by children. My sister Maya had 2 boys under 5 and a husband who drifted between jobs. My cousin Elena had 3 kids and a small apartment everyone agreed was too cramped. Every holiday conversation eventually turned into a quiet competition over who was struggling the most. I was the odd one out, the one who moved away, the one without kids. They said it gently most of the time, that I was independent, that I was lucky, that I only had to think about myself, as if that luck had fallen from the sky instead of being clawed out of long nights and tired mornings. I learned to smile and nod because arguing never changed anything. It only made me look selfish. The day I told them about the house was supposed to be simple. I invited my parents, my sister, and a few relatives over on a Sunday afternoon. I baked bread that morning, rosemary and salt on top, wanting the house to feel warm and lived in. When they arrived, they walked through slowly, opening closets, commenting on the size of the rooms. I noticed how their eyes lingered on the extra bedroom, on the backyard, on the space. My mother hugged me and said she was proud, but there was a hesitation in her voice. My father called it a good investment, practical, sensible. Maya walked straight to the back of the house and stood looking out at the yard while her boys ran circles around her legs, and something tightened in my chest then, a warning I ignored. We sat at the kitchen table, ate bread and soup, talked about small things. For a moment, I thought maybe I had been wrong. Maybe this time it would be different. Then Maya said the house would be perfect for kids, and everyone laughed lightly, like it was a harmless observation. I laughed too, even though the words landed heavy. It didn't happen all at once. There was no shouting, no tears at first. It happened in pieces, in suggestions disguised as concern. My mother asked about upkeep, about how expensive a house like that could be for one person. An aunt mentioned how hard it was for Elena to manage with 3 kids. Maya sent listings, pointing out how much money I could make if I sold, how it could help the family. I told myself they were just talking, but I felt the pressure building, subtle and persistent, like water rising slowly. Every conversation circled the same idea, that resources should go where they were needed most, that family meant sacrifice, that my life was flexible because I didn't have dependents. The first time someone said it outright was during a family dinner. We were sitting in my parents' living room, the TV murmuring in the background, kids playing on the floor. My aunt looked at me and asked if I had considered letting Elena and the kids move into my house, at least for a while. She said it like she was asking me to pass the salt. The room went quiet, not shocked, just expectant. Everyone waited for the generous answer. I thought of the mornings I woke up before dawn, the weekends I worked instead of resting. I opened my mouth and said no. The words sounded small, even to me. They didn't argue then, but something shifted. After that, every interaction carried an undercurrent. I was no longer Clara who bought a house. I was Clara who wouldn't share it. The confrontation on the front steps came a month later. Maya showed up unannounced with her boys. We stood outside because I hadn't invited her in yet. She told me their rent was going up again, that they couldn't afford it, that the boys needed stability. She gestured to the house behind me and said it didn't make sense for it to sit mostly empty when her family was struggling. When I didn't immediately agree, she said the thing that cracked something open in me. You don't even have kids, Clara. Your life is easier. You can start over anywhere. That was when I grabbed the mailbox, when shame and anger mixed into something sharp. I asked her why my work mattered less, because I didn't have children. She sighed like I was missing the point, and said it wasn't about deserving. It was about need. After she left, I went inside and locked the door. I slid down against it and sat on the floor, my own floor, and felt a grief I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the house. It was about realizing that in my family's eyes, my life was always provisional, always available to be rearranged. The calls intensified after that. My mother said Maya was desperate. My father talked about compromise. Elena cried and said her kids were suffering because of my stubbornness. I started losing sleep, replaying conversations, wondering if owning a house alone was some kind of moral failure. One evening, I came home to find my parents' car in the driveway. I hadn't invited them. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the light on in my living room, and felt dread settle in my chest. I knew whatever was waiting inside would change something. When I walked in, they were sitting at the dining table, papers spread out in front of them. Listings, mortgage estimates, notes. My father said they had been talking as a family, and wanted to discuss a solution that was fair to everyone. As he spoke, I realized they hadn't come to ask. They had come to convince. And the house around us seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as if even it knew it was being negotiated away. When my mother said I could always buy another one later, something inside me went still. I asked if they thought I'd bought this house on a whim. My father avoided my eyes. My mother said they just thought it would be better used by a family with children. That was when I understood this was no longer my house in their minds. It was a resource they felt entitled to redistribute. And I knew whatever I said next would draw a line that couldn't be erased. I didn't answer them right away. I stared at the papers on the table, copies of listings, printed estimates, a handwritten breakdown of what the house could sell for, and how the money might be divided. That was when it hit me that they had already imagined the house without me in it. My mother kept talking softly, using words like temporary and practical, saying no one wanted to hurt me, saying this was just how families survived hard times. I noticed she never once said ask. My father added that legally the house was mine, of course, but morally things were more complicated, especially when children were involved. He said it like a fact, not an opinion. Something in me loosened then, not anger, not tears, but clarity. I realized they weren't confused about my feelings. They just didn't consider them equal. I had been trying to explain myself to people who had already decided my answer was wrong. I told them I wasn't selling the house, and I wasn't giving it to anyone, not temporarily, not partially, not with conditions. My voice didn't shake. It sounded flat and calm, like I was stating the weather. My mother's face changed immediately, the softness dropping away, replaced by disappointment heavier than anger. She said she hadn't raised me to be this selfish. The word finally landed. Selfish. As if years of discipline only counted when they ended in motherhood. As if building a life quietly and alone was a refusal. My father said I was making a mistake, that I was damaging relationships that couldn't be repaired easily. I thought about how easily they were willing to damage mine instead. I told them I needed them to leave. There was a long pause, Then they gathered their papers and left. When the door closed, the house was silent in a way that felt heavier, but also cleaner. I thought that would be the worst of it. I was wrong. The weeks that followed were a slow erosion. Calls became rare, then strategic. Messages appeared in group chats instead of directly. Comments about priorities and values. Photos of Maya's kids appeared more often, smiling faces framed like evidence. Elena posted vague things online about sacrifice and disappointment. Relatives I barely spoke to suddenly had opinions about my character. One afternoon, Maya came again with our mother. I didn't invite them in. We stood near the door, the space feeling exposed. Maya said they had spoken to a lawyer friend who mentioned trusts and family agreements, ways to make things fair. She said it carefully, watching my face. I felt a coldness spread through me. I asked if she was threatening me. She laughed nervously and said no, but families needed to plan for the future, especially when assets were involved. My mother said she just wanted everyone to feel secure, and that I would understand one day when I had children. That was when I realized this wasn't about the house anymore. It was about control. About keeping the family narrative intact. My independence wasn't just inconvenient. It was destabilizing. I told them the house was not up for discussion, and that any further pressure would mean distance. Real distance. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She said she couldn't believe I would choose a building over her. I said quietly that I was choosing myself, something I had never been allowed to do before. They left angry. The silence afterward was louder than any argument. Weeks passed without calls or invitations. I spent evenings alone, learning the house's sounds, the way it settled at night, the way light moved through rooms I had almost lost. Some nights I cried, not because I wanted to give in, but because I understood what standing firm actually cost. The turning point came unexpectedly. A cousin I trusted called late one night and said she felt uncomfortable with what was happening. She had overheard conversations about pressuring me further, about making things so unpleasant that I would give up just to restore peace. Hearing it out loud stripped away the last of my doubt. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was strategy. The next day, I changed the locks. It was practical, almost boring, but when the locksmith left and I held the new keys, something settled in my chest. I wasn't acting out of spite. I was acting out of necessity. I sent one message to the family group chat. I said the house was mine, legally and personally, that the subject was closed, and that any further attempts to discuss it would mean no contact for a while. I didn't explain. I didn't soften the words. I turned off my phone and went for a long walk, noticing the quiet confidence of houses that simply existed without apology. When I turned my phone back on, the backlash was immediate. Messages ranged from pleading to furious accusations of betrayal and ingratitude. I read them once and didn't respond. Something had shifted. Their disappointment no longer felt like my responsibility. Months passed. The distance became real. Holidays were quieter. Birthdays were acknowledged with brief texts instead of gatherings. Maya stopped negotiating and became politely distant. My parents remained reserved, but no longer confrontational, as if they had accepted a version of me they didn't like but couldn't change. One evening, sitting alone in the living room, I realized the house felt different again. Not new, not contested, settled. It held my routines, my silences, my life as it was, not as someone else thought it should be. I understood then that the hardest part hadn't been buying it. It had been keeping it. And keeping the right to define what my life was worth. I didn't lose my family completely, but I lost the illusion that love automatically respected boundaries. What I gained was quieter, harder to explain. A sense of ownership deeper than walls and floors. The knowledge that my work, my choices, and my existence didn't need to be justified by children or sacrifice to be valid. The house still stands, unchanged from the outside. But inside, it carries a different weight now. Not as a resource waiting to be claimed, but as a place that belongs to me, because I finally decided that I did.